Chapter 25, Tra-la-la. I bounced over to the door where Rebecca and Danny were already in line. Today was the day of Dav Pilkey's author visit. I didn't really like his books, but I'd never met a real live author before. I also had a book of his that I'd just brought for the BBLL tucked away under my shirt. I wanted to get it autographed. Mr. Vaughn led us to the cafeteria where we sat in a big half circle with the rest of the fourth grade. Mrs. Jones stood in the middle of the circle at the projector cart with a man who I guessed was Mr. Pilkey. He was white, medium-sized, and not too old, with short brown hair and a flowery Hawaiian shirt. He smiled at something Mrs. Jones said to him, and then she called for our attention. All right, fourth graders, I'm very pleased to introduce an author whose books many of you have read and enjoyed. I know I have. Dav Pilkey, Mrs. Jones said, his name like Dave, even though it was spelled Dav, is the author of more than 50 books, most of which he also illustrated, including The Dumb Bunnies, Ricky Ricotta, and of course, Captain Underpants. He's also the winner of a Caldecott honor for The Paperboy and a number of Reader's Choice Awards around the country. The last part Mrs. Jones said after Principal Bananazeski came in the room to stand by the door, I noticed. I'm sure Mr. Pilkey will tell you lots more about his life and his books, so I'll turn things over to him. Let's give a big Shelbourne Elementary welcome to Mr. Dave Pilkey, she said. Everybody cheered, mostly just for the sake of being able to clap and yell at school. But I cheered because I was really happy he was here. Mr. Pilkey showed slides of things he had drawn when he was a kid and told us how he was always getting in trouble at school and getting sent out into the hall to sit by himself. I glanced over at Principal Bananazeski when he said that, and she did not look too happy. The kids around me were all loving it, though. Mr. Pilkey was funny, and everybody was laughing. Then Mr. Pilkey talked about when he drew his first comics and how they weren't spelled right and didn't look as good as he can draw now, and how none of that mattered because they were a lot of fun and made his friends laugh. You don't have to spell well or be great at grammar to be a writer, he told us, and you don't have to be able to draw perfectly to be an artist. Then he gave examples of famous artists who broke the rules and painted houses upside down, and famous writers who didn't use the right spelling or grammar. Some of the teachers didn't like that much either. It wasn't until Mr. Pilkey was in college that a teacher saw his drawings and told him he should be writing and drawing books for kids. That's how he became a kid's book author. He finished his talk, showed us how to draw a picture of Captain Underpants, and asked us if we had any questions. I put my hand up, but so did a lot of other kids. The questions they asked were dumb. Did you write all these books? How much money do you make? Where do you get your ideas? I like to draw comics too, which wasn't even a question. Do you know any famous authors? Can you draw Batman? And then he called on me. My heart was racing as I asked, what do you think about your books being banned from our library? The room got very quiet. I tried very hard not to look at Principal Bananazeski. Mr. Pilkey smiled. Well, I wish they were on the shelves where everybody could read them, he said. I think it's important that libraries be a place where you can find all kinds of books. Good ones, bad ones, funny ones, serious ones. Every person should be free to read whatever they want, whenever they want, and not have to explain to anyone else why they like it or why they think it's valuable. I hope you all get a chance to read my books someday. I smiled, my heart still thumping so loud in my chest, I thought everyone could hear it. The one copy of Captain Underpants I'd bought before the author's visit was going to be checked out forever. I looked over at Principal Bananazeski again. She had her arms folded, and she was glaring, but not at Mr. Pilkey, and not at me. She was glaring at Mrs. Jones. People asked more questions, mostly dumb ones, and then Mrs. Jones said we were out of time. Everybody cheered again to thank Mr. Pilkey for being here, and the teachers started dismissing us by class. Mr. Vaughn, can I go and meet the author? I begged. He nodded. Come right back to class afterward, he told me. I grabbed Rebecca and Danny without asking if they could come too and hurried across the room to where Mrs. Jones stood with Mr. Pilkey. Mrs. Jones hugged me while we waited for a couple of kids from another class to be done showing their comic books to Mr. Pilkey. "My little rebel," Mrs. Jones said to me. "Rebel? Me?" The two boys who had drawn the comics were finally called away by their teacher, and we got to say hello. That's when I realized I couldn't say anything to him about the BBLL, not with Mrs. Jones standing right there, and that's all I'd come to talk about. Rebecca, Danny, and I just stood there smiling up at him for a long time. He smiled back like he was waiting for us to say something, but after a while his smile began to falter. "So, do any of you guys like to draw?" Mr. Pilkey asked us. We all shook our heads. "Oh, do you like to write?" We all shook our heads. Mr. Pilkey laughed. "Well, you like to read at least, I hope." "Oh yeah," Rebecca said. "You have no idea." A student tripped over the cord to the projector cart, and Mrs. Jones hurried away to take care of it. Finally! I looked around once to make sure no one else was watching and pulled the Captain Underpants book out from under my shirt. "Will you sign this?" He looked surprised and took the book from me. He looked even more surprised when he saw the cover. "Tales of a Fourth Grade Zombie?" he said. The cover had a picture of a kid who looked like a zombie and another kid passed out on the ground beside him. "That's just what's on the outside," I told Mr. Pilkey, and I opened the book to show him what was inside, The Adventures of Captain Underpants. "Oh," he said. He flipped through it and found the envelope I'd pasted in the back with the checkout card in it. "Oh," he said. He looked at the fake cover again. "Who did the art?" "Our friend MJ, he's in 5th grade, Danny said. "Tell him I said it's great. I should write a real book called Tales of a 4th Grade Zombie." He looked around to see if anybody was looking. "So I'm guessing your teachers don't know you have this." We all shook our heads. "I see." He took a Sharpie from his pocket and opened the book to a front page. "Anybody in particular I should make it out to?" "The BBLL," Danny said. "BBLL?" he asked. He wrote in the book, "To the BBLL," and drew a quick sketch of Captain Underpants saying "Tra-la-la" under his signature. "Do I want to know what BBLL stands for?" he asked as he handed it back. I stuffed the book up under my shirt. "Probably not," I said. "All right, well, keep reading, you guys, and don't get into too much trouble." Mrs. Jones came back. "Mr. Pilkey, when you're done with these 3, I have one more student for you to meet." I almost squeaked. Mrs. Jones had brought Trey McBride to see the author. Why? I sucked in my stomach, praying he couldn't see the book under my shirt. "We have to get back to class," I said. I grabbed Rebecca and Danny and ran off so fast before Mr. Pilkey barely had time to call out "bye" to us.